Yes, Pies fans, welcome back to another video. In this one, we're going to be breaking down all of Collingwood's problems since that 2023 grand final win that seems so far away. The Hawthorn loss at the weekend was probably the final straw that broke the camel's back. Is that the saying? But we are going to try to understand why it's dropped off so much and look into the kind of deeper list issues surrounding that. So we'll start off with probably there are a lot more deeper things to get into here, but the one that I want to start off with is the retirement of Nathan Murphy that happened earlier this year, because I think that's a big impetus and focal point of the whole mess that they're in at the moment. In the first quarter of Collingwood's historic 2023 Premiership win, Nathan Murphy lay on the turf of the MCG. He'd suffered his 10th official career concussion and would take no further part in the game, and would ultimately retire early in the 2024 season. Murphy's retirement, albeit unfortunate, wasn't seen by the wider footballing world as having mortal consequences for the Pies. He was a defender, he wasn't a top 5 player, and had only just established himself as a best 22 player in that side. Now, obviously the Nathan Murphy retirement is something that you can't really foresee happening, a concussion retirement that early in a career. So you can't pin that on anyone, but it does kind of lay bare some of the deeper issues. Now, we'll start just purely with the Murphy one, because I think the Murphy one is just the repercussions that affect the 2024 season and how it's kind of gone downhill so quickly. So the reason Murphy is so important to Collingwood is partly his age profile. He was 24 years of age. He was a 192 centimetre key defender, a mobile key defender that could lock down and give you a little bit of attacking threat at the same time. Not in the sense of metres gained or ball movement, but he was that diffuser. He was the second best interceptor to Darcy Moore. And he had that uncanny ability to get over and help be that second defender up with his athleticism that could sort of, move him quicker than some of those other players, and he had the height and the athleticism to be able to jump with some of those key defenders. Collingwood would sort of set their defence up with Murphy as the focal point. He would take the most dangerous forward on a weekly basis. He'd be that lockdown player, and then the other forwards could kind of do their thing and propel from there. Your Darcy Moores, your Braden Maynards, your Isaac Quaynors, they could all be really offensive because they knew that Nathan Murphy was going to be there doing the hard work for them. He lost only 18% of his defensive one-on-ones in 2023. That's just behind GWS's Sam Taylor and rates him as competition 17th for those defensive one-on-ones. Darcy Moore was so intrinsically linked to Nathan Murphy, I would say. He's dropped 2 full rating points this season. He's gone from 16 disposals per game to 12, from 2.6 score involvements to 1.8. And he's losing more one-on-ones as well. So Nathan Murphy just gives you so much more defensive stability that the current back six don't have, and they just still have not been able to replace that with their current list form. The same thing's happened to Isaac Quaynor. He's had to have really strange roles this season. I think there was a game there he was playing on Jeremy Cameron, which he's way outsized. In 2023, he was a part of that Collingwood back six that were the best team at transitioning the ball from the back half into the front half, and that's just completely dropped off. And, players like Quaynor and Braden Maynard are a key reason for that. So the big question to kind of ask ourselves here is, why couldn't Collingwood absorb this injury to Nathan Murphy? Now, I don't think any team can really replace a defender like that in their prime with such athleticism and such ability to win one-on-ones, but Collingwood should have been able to do something to be able to just help their team, at least for the short term, with the Nathan Murphy problem. He could have had some sort of other injury that wasn't a retirement that also they would have had to replace. That's just normal practice throughout a season. I've compared them to a couple of other teams here just to give us some context, I suppose, on where their list sits with key position defenders and those players that are able to play the Nathan Murphy role. So the Pies have 5 key position defenders on their list at the moment, which is a pretty low number as it is. That's key position defenders over 190 centimetres there, just to qualify. With Nathan Murphy's retirement, that number drops to 4, and it's starting to get a pretty low number. They've got Darcy Moore, who was a father-son draft pick. They've got Charlie Dean, who was a rookie selection a couple of years ago. Jeremy Howe, who's a 34-year-old, traded from Melbourne, obviously. And Billy Frampton, who is a rookie listed player. So a couple of things jump out at me there. Outside of Darcy Moore, there's not really a lot of high-end talent that you've actually pulled from the draft with your key position defenders. Jeremy Howe probably sits in that bracket, but at his age, he's starting to drop off. And then you've got Charlie Dean and Billy Frampton, who are pretty much top-up type players. So it's kind of Darcy Moore or bust when you take away Nathan Murphy. If you compare that to some other teams in the league, the Sydney Swans, they have 7 key position defenders over 190 centimetres with players like, Nick Blakey that also have that offensive threat as well. And we look at the Western Bulldogs, who I kind of see as a team that have always been knocked for not having the best key position defenders. They've sort of had, been called to put forwards behind the ball like they've done with Rory Lobb at the moment. They've got 8 key position defenders on their list, and that's not even including Rory Lobb or Aaron Norton, players that have been kind of asked to go behind the ball at times. And the Collingwood list managers have talked about this a little bit. They've kind of been pretty public with the way that they've come out and said that they want to go for running players, and that's turned them off, I guess, key position players a little bit. And I think this one has come back to bite them slightly. They've had a couple of draft misses that have hurt them too. They had Trey Rusco, who they drafted a few years ago, and Will Kelly, and they were probably wanting to be groomed into these key position type roles and could have played some auxiliary defensive roles, and they haven't really come on. And it's just led to this big hole in the squad at a defensive post and even in the front half of the ground with the key position forwards as well. And it goes back to this bigger problem that's really holistic in the entire Collingwood list, and that is just a problem that they've had with drafting out of the top end or even the back end of the national drafts. They haven't had very many hits at all in recent seasons. If you take away the father-sons and the NGA prospects that they've got through the draft, like your Dacos, your Darcy Moore, your Isaac Quaynor and your Josh Dacoses, they don't really have much to show for their national draft hands. And all their hits have come out of the mid-season draft and the rookie draft, which is a big tick for those list managers, that they've been able to find players at such low currency level and get the most out of players like Brody Mychek and John Noble types and that sort of thing. But what it does do is it leaves you with a real big talent hole, because as much as those players can come in and perform for you, they still lack top end talent that those high level draft players have, like your Dacoses and your Darcy Moore. They don't have the pedigree to be able to put these 250, 300 game careers with a high skill level that teams like Sydney Swans and the Western Bulldogs are really benefiting from at the moment. And here is the graphic that sort of illustrates this best. You've got Collingwood here, who have got added 12 players through, free agency and trades onto their list, which is fine because some of those are more higher pedigree players from the high end of the draft. Sydney have added 6 from that space. Western Bulldogs have added 7, probably more of a competition average level. Mid-season and rookie picks. So again, Collingwood are at the higher end of these types of picks. And this isn't the entire list, just to clarify. So these are close to best 22, players that have played in the best 22 or are pushing for that at the moment, because we're kind of talking about the actual starting squad when we talk about the 2024 season. And then you've got the elite draft picks, and this is where it really falls off for Collingwood. Collingwood have had 6 elite draft picks that they've been able to get out of the top end of the draft. 11 if you include the father-son and academy picks that they've had, like Dacos and Moore and those types. Sydney have had 18 of those if you combine their academy and their national draft selection. So they've got a huge amount of talent in that starting squad. And the Western Bulldogs also have 18 as well. So they've been able to find gun players at the right end of the draft to make this a really highly talented squad. The other thing to note with Collingwood's 11 players that they've got through the high end of the draft, 2 of them are Scott Pendlebury and Steele Sidebottom, so they're really at the back end of their career. So you take those 2 away, the number drops to 9, and it's starting to look a little bit hairy as far as top end talent. Now, there is some good news coming, so hold off there. We'll keep going through these issues and we'll get to the end where I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Collingwood, so don't worry too much. So this is where we go back through those players that were drafted in the last few years, and kind of, it's probably not for great reading for Collingwood fans. We go back to 2019 with their national draft picks. Jay Rantow, pick 40, Trent Bianco, pick 45, and Trey Rusco, pick 55. All 3 players have been delisted from the 2019 crop. 2020, it's Ollie Henry. He's now moved on to Geelong, obviously by his own choice. Probably a hit there if he had have stayed. Finlay McRae just can't seem to establish himself. I think he's too one-paced, a little bit concerned with his future development at the club. Reef McInnes, I still like him. I still think he has potential to impact this side, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Caleb Poulter, he's playing VFL with the Dogs at the moment. Liam McMahon, who's been delisted, and the hit there at 44. And this is a bit of a theme with Collingwood. The The real later picks and the mid-seasons and those types of players, they seem to be able to get a lot of hits on, and they have with McCreary here with pick 44. They can't seem to get those high-end picks right. 2021, they get Nick Daicos. Obviously, that is a bit of a gift for them, but, you know, helps top up this quality. Arlo Draper, he's been delisted, who was pick 45, sorry. Cooper Murley, 49, delisted. Harvey Harrison with pick 52, you'd probably have to say that's a hit. He's started to get games at senior level and looks like a real player. So another one with the last pick in the draft they've been able to nail. And then you've got 2022, which is Ed Allen, Jacob Ryan, and Joe Richards. Again, Joe Richards looks to be the best of those three players so far. Still potential, and we haven't seen enough of those other two, but at this stage, we can't see any, you know, major talent, high-end talent with those players. And I haven't included 2023 because it's probably just a little bit too soon. So the overwhelming takeaway is that they haven't been able to hit with any of the, you know, they've got no cut through with those top picks. Anything between about 10 and 30 they haven't been able to nail, and that's left a real lack of talent on the list. They've, you know, propped up the list with some of those other players, but it's not enough when you look at it in a holistic sense. So I think then a sensible question would be to ask, how did they win the Premiership in 2023 if there are these list holes? And I think there's ways around that. And I don't think the list holes, I think this is the small margins that we're operating in when we talk about clubs' lists. It's not that Collingwood's list is terrible, but they have made some mistakes in the top end of the draft. It has hurt them, and it's why we're seeing this drop off in 2024. Everything that came together in 2023, you know, Craig McRae's energy, his, you know, intense game style that he was able to implement, the scoring from the back half, the generational talent in Nick Daicos, the scores from clearance that is probably understood in AFL terms to be a bit more of a random scoring source, but Collingwood were able to mesh and get that mix of midfielders and scoring off halfback. Just, it was like the perfect storm in 2023 that they brought together with their ability to be able to control big moments in games as well. And just any slight little, you know, fall off from that can mean what's happened to Collingwood, you know, can result in what's happened to Collingwood this season, which has been a pretty significant drop off. The silver lining is, of course, and I go back to Nick Daicos, I mentioned him a number of times throughout this video, he's a generational player. And having him at the centre of any sort of a list rebuild, not that I'm calling this a list rebuild, it's more of a supplementation, I would say, but having him at the centre of that is just unbelievable. The other good news for Collingwood fans is that Thomas McGuan comes into the side in 2026 as a father-son. He's a potential top 2 to 3 pick in the next year's draft. So any midfield talk that we have with Collingwood has to be around the idea that Nick Daicos and Thomas McGuan are going to be leading that. You've then got partners there that can still play for the next few years in Jordan De Goey, who's a top liner, and you can add in some of those other guys that still have potential, you know, your Reef McInnes's, and that can be the future for Collingwood's midfield, and they can add around that in the draft with the key position players that they're going to have to aim for in the next couple of drafts and look within, which we'll get into here in a second. Remembering too that around that midfield, you've got still a pretty young Darcy Moore, the captain, and a bookend there at the back. And then you've got Dan McStay, who's a bit of a younger sort of key forward, not super young, but compared to, say, a Mychek, you've got him there. So you've got a key position defender and a key position forward to lead you forward, as well as that midfield. So the future's still there. It's going to be a quick, on-the-go sort of rebuild here for Collingwood, I would say. So I think Collingwood have to look at the rebuild here from two sides, kind of. They've got to look internally to try to develop some of those players that are already currently on their list to fill the holes that we've talked about, such as the Nathan Murphy problem. We've also got to look at going to the draft, picking up highly talented players and actually getting some hits with some of these guys. Now, the first one I want to talk about here is a recent draftee. He came from the 2023 crop. I think he's a wonderful player. He's got pace, he's got beautiful ball use, and he can be thrown onto that half back line. I'm surprised he actually hasn't really got the appearances in 2024 so far. It is Harry D Matia. He's 19 years of age. He's 186, so he's a really nice size. He was number 25 in the draft, so he has that level of pedigree. Played at the Dandenong Stingrays, and he's a weapon with the ball. He can fly off half back. And I think in 2025 at least, he has to start being a regular player in this best 22 for Collingwood. They can play him in a Daicos-esque sort of nice half-back role. Whether he moves onto the wing, whether he goes on goes on ball down the track is another question. But I think he's a player that they have to build around as well. He can come into this side and, release some of those defenders and get that back six working a bit better again. The other one, and I think this is more of the direct Nathan Murphy replacement for now, it's Jaff, who we've seen a little bit of this season and obviously isn't at the level that Nathan Murphy was at retirement, but you have to put some development into this guy. He's played some really good football in the defence for Collingwood. He's a little bit undersized compared to Nathan Murphy, but has that athleticism and has that running profile that Murphy had to be able to get across and help teammates. Not necessarily be an attacking threat, but be that interceptor to be able to help Darcy Moore do what he does to the highest possible level. The other big question is what to do with these ageing players. I want to go through them one by one. So the first one is Steele Sidebottom, and Steele's the one that I really think needs to be a consideration to be moved on at the end of 2024. He does look like that classic case of the game going past him. I don't want to throw the cliches, but does just look like it's just one step too quick for him. And he was always a player that played a lot with his mind, and that part of the game seems to be sort of diminishing for him a little bit. He's 33 years old. I think you just send him out as an absolute club champion, and you say, thanks, Steele, but we've got to look to the younger players in the future. The next one is Jeremy Howe, who is actually older than Steele Sidebottom, but I think still has at least one more season to offer this Collingwood back six. I don't think you want to be cutting any more deep after the Nathan Murphy retirement. So I think he goes on for at least one more season. You try to get games into Jaff, develop him, and then you're starting to get some replacement going at the same time and looking to the draft as well. Pendle's minimum stays for another season. If you actually look at Pendle's numbers, there might be a few little things with the eye test, but I think he's actually putting up pretty much similar output to what he has in recent seasons. He's a high-level player. We know what a professional that he is and what he can offer to this, upcoming midfield brigade. I think in an ideal situation, Pendles is actually hanging around until at least Thomas McGuan's first season, so he can kind of be a bit of a mentor for him, and what he gives on-field is probably, what he gives off-field, is probably just as equal to what he gives on-field at this stage. Finn Macrae is next, and obviously not in the same conversation being an older player. He's more one that just can't seem to bed himself into this team. I think Collingwood have drafted a little bit too heavily over the last few years in that type, that sort of taller, bigger-bodied midfielder that sort of lacks any other hurt factor outside of their size, I think. They've even gone in the mid-season draft players like Ned Long. We talked about Reef McInnes, who can't really get into this side. He's another one, and there's even more that I can't think of off the top of my head. But I don't know, could you get some trade cachet going for Finn Macrae? Maybe you could get a pick in the 30s or 40s. Someone in a sort of medium rebuild stage would take him on as a younger player to sort of help build a midfield around, and I think that's a possibility and something that Collingwood could try to look to get, again, try to look for a more athletic key position player over a midfielder like Finn Macrae. Tom Mitchell's interesting because Tom Mitchell's really dropped off from a numbers point of view this season. He's only around the 30 years of age mark, so it's not like you want to be retiring a guy like this, but I think they just have to get back to a midfield mix that works for Tom Mitchell. Again, I think it's going to be low time on ground. I think it's going to be purely from a clearance point of view that he's getting in there and trying to help, but not just, I think this season it's almost like he's in there just as like a defensive sort of to help with your clearance differential, but I think he really has to be more of an offensive threat to be able to release Deos, to be able to release De Goey. Perhaps that's one of the actual issues with Tom Mitchell this season. The fact that Nick Daicos has gone into the midfield. Daicos is such a force as a hit-to player because of his reaction speed at clearance. He can pounce on that ground ball, and maybe that's kind of cut into Tom Mitchell, taken his productivity away and sort of taken his responsibility and role away in the team, and he sort of shrunk a little bit because I think his numbers are sort of pulling this midfield down a little bit. I think you obviously persist with him, and I don't think you're going to get a lot for him in the trade market. So I think you go around again and just try to use him as best as you possibly can in a new sort of era of Collingwood mids. So then the question becomes, who do they look for in the draft? I've spoke with the guys at Pies Footy about this plenty of times. I think the way that the draft is sort of shaping up at this current moment, if it was being held right now, I think Collingwood have to be looking for a key position forward or a key position defender with that high pick that they've got. I think the fans are pretty well sold on a key position forward, and I think that's fair. I think it's pretty equal needs with key position forwards and key position defenders at the moment. I think what you can get in the key forwards department is really strong around this pick 26 that they hold. I think you're looking at either Thomas Sims or Job Shanahan. Job's the 194 centimetre, more classic, traditional key forward, more in line with like a Tom Hawkins type. Very good in contested marking, has great forward craft, but doesn't have any absolute major attributes in an athletic profile sense that, say, Tom Sims has, who's the other one. Tom Sims really projects highly because of his 200 centimetres, his amazing vertical leap, and his top 5 test in the agility that he pulled off earlier this season. Makes him a real prospect and one that's definitely developed more this season compared to Job Shanahan. From where he was in, say, January to now, it's a bigger jump, and sometimes that's something that recruiters look for. So I think Sims or Shanahan complements this team and can come in and, eventually down the track replace your Mychek, who's going to play for the next couple of seasons. With pick 44, I think you're looking at someone like a running halfback. You've got Harrison Oliver there, who I talked about. It'd be unlikely that he slips through to pick 44, but it's potential with just some of those other key forwards that are coming into the picture. He's a real, attacking halfback. Pretty good defensively as well, but does most of his damage with ball in hand. Similar to someone like a Will Powell, I would say, at the Gold Coast. You've got Lockie Jakes, who was an All-Australian this year after the National Championships. Really equipped himself well for Vic Country there, and probably has less of a skill set and less of a ball-winning ability as Oliver, but still gives that drive, gives that metres gained off the half-back line that Collingwood have missed. Albeit, I still think their major problem is around that, lockdown defender that Nathan Murphy was for them. So, another thing that they can do with the Thomas McGuan situation in their back pocket, they might be able to trade away a future first that would get eaten up by the McGuan bid anyway. They might be able to trade back into the first round of this season to get something going. That'll be something that they kind of work through in the back half of this season. But yeah, that's definitely something I could see them doing, and that would open up their draft hand quite significantly. And then again, you're looking at that quick bounce in the next 2 to 3 years that Collingwood are pumping back up the ladder with those picks. I'm going to do here my round 1 team for 2025. I wanted to do the 2026 team to add Thomas McGuan, but I'll do 25 anyway. So I've got Jaff in there in the back line, being that sort of lockdown / intercept defender to help out Darcy Moore, who's at fullback. Braden Maynard back there as well, one of the regulars. Isaac Quaynor as well. I think they just need to come back into a little bit more form, particularly Quaynor, who's been very down from a productivity point of view this season. I've got Charlie Dean in there at centre half back, who I think he can certainly do a job. Probably or potentially needs to be replaced at some point down the track. Then I've got D Matia in there off the half-back line. I think he can really impress us in 2025, become a elite young player. He can challenge for the Rising Star and those types of awards with what he offers from a versatility point of view. Josh Deos on the wing. He really needs to get back into form. Again, I think that's a game plan issue from 2024. I've got Reef McInnes here as one of the on-ballers, so I'll get back to him in a second. Jack Crisp on the other wing. Then you've got a forward line of Schultz, Brody Mychek, Joe Richards, who's shown some really good signs this season as a small forward. Bobby Hill, we know he's absolutely top class. Dan McStay there as the full forward, and Bo McCreery in there to apply forward pressure and be a bit of a nightmare at the stoppages for opposition. Darcy Cameron tracking towards All-Australian ruck levels this season. Dacos, DeGoey. And then I want to bring in Iliro Smith here, the developing ruckman who's playing VFL. He's actually shown really good performances this year in the VFL as a forward as well, and I think that Collingwood could really explore that as a bit of a, at least a way of getting him to play some senior football, and then before he goes into the ruck more longer term. Got Lipinski there. Jacob Ryan, one that's had, I think, a game this season in the AFL. He's played some pretty good football off half-back and kind of is that hybrid between a lockdown and offensive. So another one that has potential maybe to do a bit of the job that Nathan Murphy was doing. He's quite athletic as well, is Ryan. And then I've got Thomas Sims there as potentially that key position forward that's come into the team. So I think the big ones there are Reef McInnes. I know Collingwood fans are pretty torn on him, but he does have a pretty big skill set that I think that you've got to keep persisting with, and it's why they haven't sort of delisted him, albeit that he hasn't been able to get into this side. So he sits at that number of over 190 centimetres. They have a lot of mids like that, but McInnes has extra speed. He has extra athleticism that some of those other guys don't have. His running ability is first rate. He can get up and down the ground. He can play forward. He has that craft and he has that overhead marking ability. I think if you're putting McInnes up against some of the bigger bodied, forward mid hybrids in this year's draft. He really looks like one of the, in his draft year, he looked like one of those players. And I think there's a reason they're keeping this guy around. I know he hasn't shown absolutely the ceiling of what he can do, but if he can embed himself into this midfield in 2025, along with De Goey and Deos, and, you know, they can use Tom Mitchell off the bench, I think that then in, you know, 2026, when they bring in Thomas McGuan, you can have a midfield of sort of a Nick Deos, a Thomas McGuan. You can start to phase some of those older guys out, and then Reef McInnes is like your third or your fourth as De Goey starts to age. So I think that's where they've got to be looking in 2025 to make some of that progression internally, sort of a little mini rebuild on the go. You know, you want to be pushing for finals in 2025. I think 2024 is kind of dead at this point, and it's just about getting games into players that you can sort of set up and give them a bit of a platform to go bang in 2025. I think sometimes it's hard for teams in Collingwood's situation where they've won a premiership, they've got stars, their list certainly has some disbalance within it, which Collingwood's does from, I think, a high-end talent point of view and an age profile point of view. But I think fans either want to see that real youth coming through and they want to be the exciting, you know, Hawthorn or North Melbourne coming through where they're like blooding all these young players, or they want to be a team like Sydney that just has this like high-end talent. But the way Collingwood have done it has just been a little bit different. They've stocked up with traded players. They've topped up their list when you kind of thought they needed to rebuild. And I think they've actually done a really good job. It's just that perhaps in that whole, you know, mesh of ideas, the high-end draft picks have got a little bit forgotten, and it's left a bit of a vacuum in the pedigree and the talent point of view. And I think that's just where they need to just spend a little bit more energy, a little bit more resources in that area. There's still opportunity to do that in the trade period too, but of course the draft is the sort of, it's the one-stop shop. It's the place that you have to come back to. That has been my Collingwood list review. I'm sure there's plenty of questions and there's a few things that I've missed. I know supporters, particularly with the VFL performances, have a real deep grasp of how the guys are going at VFL. You know, my real area is the Coates Talent League and the, you know, national under-18 competitions more so than the VFL, although I'm just keeping an eye on these guys. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, love to get some engagement down in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.